Let's get into it. Sold Not For Sale podcast. Coach Colin here. Now, we got an interesting one. Joe Rogan is talking with his guest. His guest is letting him know this theory he has about China, communism, and how it is coming to America. Now, one thing that he touches on that I found very interesting, that sent me down this little rabbit hole of thought, is that he talks about a time where Klaus Schwab, Henry Kissinger, I think a Rockefeller was involved, and the then Emperor of China all got together. This is the person who took over after Mao. And they all had a meeting, and then what's been going on between the US and China then ensued. Now, what this made me realize is that this story that he's telling us, these facts that he's telling us, they're not that conspiratorial. They actually sync up with something that they've been working on for a long time. When I say they, I mean the World Economic Forum. So I'm going to play this clip for you. Then I'm actually going to play some of Vivek talking about China, because he makes a lot of sense there. Then I'm going to play Trump talking about China in the past, and then him talking about China currently. All sort of kind of makes sense. And it leads me to Trump was right once again. I have to say it. Yeah, I have my bias, but I also feel like this guy was right again. I think he saw the writing on the wall. Let's get into it. Don't forget about the new channel I got. It's called Coach Colin Media, where I break away from the Rogan content. We got 78 videos up there already. Hit that like button, that subscribe button. There's a link in the description. But otherwise, let's get into this Rogan clip.
Difficult, right?
Right.
But so there's that kind of stuff. But there's also a huge geopolitical, I hate misusing that word. I learned what the word geopolitical really means.
What does it really mean?
It means politics of earth things like waterways, oceans,
dams.
Oh,
Interesting.
And so it's like,
I've always used it wrong too.
I go totally like autistic every time I say the word now. And I'm like, damn it, I know it means something different because we all use it wrong, but I'm going to use it wrong anyway. There's a geopolitical move from China right now called the Belt and Road Initiative. And the Belt and Road Initiative, that's tied to the BRICS. That's the idea is that the entire global south, with China as its head, is going to become the new epicenter, the superpower of the world. And it's going to be not just trade. I mean, China doesn't exactly trade on fair terms. They're going to go and basically exploit places. We'll build you a nice airport. We'll build you a nice port. We'll build you some highways. By the way, they all go straight to the mine, and we're taking all of your lithium when we come in. That's your deal. And now you're economically dependent on us. Pretty standard game that they're playing. And that Belt and Road Initiative actually is a competing interest to spreading democracy around the world. So I know Vivek Ramaswamy, really hit this out of the park, where he said, we went over to China and said, let's spread democracy to China. So in a sense, we bit off way more than we could chew, if you want to think of it that way. Let's spread democracy to China. And China was like, ha ha ha, yeah, let's see. And they flipped the table on us and made it so that if you want to get in the Chinese market, so first they become the manufacturing base of the world, but then if you want to play in the Chinese market, what do you have to do? Well, the CCP puts up a firewall, and if you don't play by the Chinese rules, you don't get into China. So now Nike and all these big, corporations and all these other, and NBA, I name Nike because it just keeps coming to mind, but there's a huge consumer market over there that's buying up stuff like crazy. That's one of the things I witnessed in China. Everybody's starting to have money, so they're buying up brand name stuff everywhere that they can all the time to show that they have some money now. And huge market. So they want into the market. The market's gigantic. It's the manufacturing base. So it's, relationships are built. But if you want to play, you play by Chinese rules. So spreading democracy partly didn't work because we have to play by China's rules. And that's the Belt and Road Initiative is meant to create a global South network. So we're the global North. That's South America, parts of Africa, a lot of like Indonesia, India, and then China. Of course, BRICS just throws Russia into that mix, but otherwise that's who you're talking about. And China's setting itself up to be the kind of global superpower or hegemon of that entire project. And we're talking about the flow of trillions of dollars of goods and oil and energy and whatever every year. So that's a huge thing to play with. And it turns out, I don't think, if we take Vivek's line, we got outfoxed in the deal. So spreading democracy, there are lots of these cultural reasons. Oh, they're not ready for democracy. I don't know. Maybe some places, maybe not some places. But there are other pressures too that we've been asleep to. We have not been paying attention as a country. Maybe some of our State Department people have been to China for the way that we should have been. Like we should have been in the 80s and 90s. Like, oh no, China, right? But we were like, oh yeah, China. Okay, cool. Yeah, go make all of our cheap stuff for us.
Well, they've done an amazing thing in combining communism with capitalism.
That's right.
If you just have North Korea, you never develop a real superpower.
Thank you, Joe. I beat this drum, and I get called crazy all the time because what I'm trying to tell people is that communism is what's happening to this country, okay? But it doesn't look like communism because it's like, how is Nike communist?
Right.
And I'm picking on Nike. No, how's Boeing? Let's pick on Boeing instead. How is Boeing communist? How is Disney communist, right? They're huge mega corporations What did Google just lose over its stupid AI? $90 billion or something. It's something insane. Like, I didn't even know they had that much money to lose. And it's like, holy crap, in stockholder value or whatever, or shareholder value.
So it was only $9 billion.
Was it? I thought that was Bud Light. That was 9.
No, Bud Light was 27.
But look at what we're like haggling over, like
insane amounts
11,
of money.
12 figure,
I know, right?
Yeah. And so it's like at least 10 figure numbers of money. Like, Elon kind of rolls in that department, but nobody else does. So anyways, where was I going with this? Because this is huge. Oh, the communist. How in the world are these huge things communist, right? So communism didn't work, right? Soviet Union sucked. North Korea sucked. Cuba sucks. Like, I'm sure it's like geographically beautiful, but we know those places are dysfunctional as hell.
Right.
We can go to the Eastern Bloc. They're still devastated in a lot of ways. They're still not all the way together. Like, communism didn't work. But if we think of like what Marx did leading up to, say, 1917, when Lenin kind of took over as communism 1.0, that never really even got off the ground. Then Lenin got it off the ground, and you get the Soviet model, which is Soviet just means committee, by the way, if you didn't know that. It's like a ruling council or committee. So Soviet model takes over with what they called Marxism-Leninism, and that worked, kind of. It worked. They still had it in China till Mao died. They had it in Soviet Union until, 89, 90, 91, something like that when it fell. But what happened was when Mao died, like, the Soviet Union wasn't doing great. It was starting to fall apart. A new model got picked up, and we talk about Mao Zedong sometimes, and I would love to talk to you all day about Mao. That's my new research project, but we don't talk about his successor. His successor was Deng Xiaoping, and this is where I actually disagree with Vivek about what I was just saying. Deng Xiaoping had a saying that was, I don't care if the cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. And what he was talking about is, I don't care if we use markets or we use a Soviet-style central committee to organize our society, as long as China's economy comes back. That's what he really meant. And so Deng didn't come up with this new model to open the markets on his own. We didn't go to China to necessarily just to spread democracy. We went to build China. And who's we? Well, let's name the names. Who was in the meeting? And there's a movie about some of these meetings were in China, and there's not a movie, but there's a movie called Mr. Deng Goes to Washington that took place in Washington, D.C., so you can go watch the movie. I'm not making this up. Deng Xiaoping was the leader of China. He's already networking with Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum in his spacesuit, but he meets with, and the list of people were Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, allegedly T.H. Chan, David Rockefeller, and the sitting new emperor or whatever, CCP chairman of China, Deng Xiaoping, and they cook up this plan to open Chinese markets. And the plan was to spread democracy into America, but I suspect it was mostly to get really rich. We open those markets, huge amount of money, giant multinational corporations are not tied to any geographical place, and they can get rich off their balls. Now, some of these guys, I think, were also ideologically motivated. The Rockefellers have funded communist crap all over the world for a very long time. China was communist. Deng Xiaoping said, well, I'm not opening the market for the market. I'm opening the market for socialism, to make socialism productive. And so they had I think there was more of a plan there than we take into account, which means Vivek gives, I need a tinfoil hat. Vivek sees that our motivations in building China were necessarily good. I think the motivations for building China were to create the pincher of a trap that's called Thucydides' trap in ancient kind of military strategy, that the only escape from would be to facilitate China's rise and decimate the West in order to avoid a nuclear-tipped World War III. And I think they knew what they were doing and were going to get rich on it.
You think by spreading democracy, their idea was to reinvigorate China's economy so that China becomes a threat?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, so it's trying to get, so the
Thucydides... That is so 4D chess, the back pages of Reddit conspiracy.
Well, listen, we know that Klaus Schwab is if there are conspiracies, the James Bond villain, kind of not quite out of central casting.
See the photo we have of him in the bathroom?
Yeah.
With the Darth Vader outfit on?
With the spacesuit. I'm the one who told you about his spacesuit. We put it up on the screen.
Yes.
Do you know who Klaus Schwab's mentor was?
I do, but I forgot.
Henry Kissinger.
That's right.
Who was in the same meeting. This was a Harvard plot.
His father was a Nazi.
I can't vet that for positive sure, but that's what I have heard.
What is this? What is the truth of that? Let's find out. Who is Klaus Schwab's father? At least.
So Klaus Schwab, we already did a video on that whole thing. Klaus Schwab's father was connected to that party. He was doing, I believe it was sales, something about blowtorches, but for all intensive purposes, he was so close that you could consider him at the very, very, very least an ally. So you can take that for what you will. Kind of makes sense when you see his son today. Obviously. So, but I found that whole conversation very interesting, right? Henry Kissinger, I think he said JD or David Rockefeller, Klaus Schwab, the then Chinese emperor, they all meet up, right? So I'm going to play Vivek talking about China, giving his perspective because it kind of gives you more context into what he's talking about when he keeps referencing Vivek. Let's just jump into that, and then I'll touch on what I want to touch on in a second here.
Well, I think there's an old saying that if you can't explain it to a fifth grader, you probably don't know what you mean yourself. So let me see if I can meet that test, okay? So here's the, because it is a kind of complicated issue. So here's the game that China played with us. Okay, we told ourselves that we could export Big Macs and Happy Meals and somehow spread democracy to places like China. That this is global capitalism. Well, what China realized is that actually we can win that game. So we thought we were going to use our money to get them to be more like us. What happened is they realized they could use access to their market, their money, to get us to be more like them. Or actually one step worse than that, they realized they could use our money to get us to be more like them, and it's worked. Right? So that's how you get to large U.S. companies systematically criticizing the U.S. without saying a peep in China, systematically applying carbon emissions caps to the U.S. energy sector here at home, like BlackRock. So they do that to Chevron and Exxon, tell you, you can't release carbon in this country in the interest of global climate change, where that same carbon emission is now being picked up on the other side of the world by the likes of PetroChina. And then you look at who's one of the largest shareholders of PetroChina, it's none other than BlackRock using the Chinese client money to do it. So this isn't capitalism. This is mercantilism, where they're calling our farce, using our own companies back against us as lobbying pawns, forced data transfers, forced technology transfers. I'm actually going to share something with you guys that you probably don't know. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is just plain old boring reality. Airbnb. Anybody in here ever use Airbnb? Few of you. So Airbnb literally has to hand over the user data of American users on its platform as a condition for Airbnb being able to do business in China. That includes even the private messages sent between someone who's a renter and a host. That's not capitalism, folks. That is mercantilism. It is a use of our own companies as Trojan horses to undermine the United States from within. So I think this is our moment to say we will sign the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson signed in 1776. By the way, he wasn't that much older than you were back then. He was about 14 years older than you. 24 years old, the guy signed the Declaration of Independence. The greatest mission statement ever written for a nation in human history. That is the Declaration of Independence that I'll sign as your next president, to say that we will not depend on an enemy for the shoes on our feet or the phones in our pockets. And you know what's going to happen? China is going to fold and say we're going to have to play by the same set of rules, because that would hurt them far more than it would hurt us.
So, very interesting, right? And I can't help but think that this makes sense. I mean, look at China. When it comes to, he brought up Nike. James brought up Nike. The NBA, LeBron James has so many times cowered down to China. WWE had John Cena apologizing to China in Mandarin, mind you. He spoke perfect Mandarin while he was doing this. Movies, TV, and even, as Vivek just stated, Uber as well. But movies, if there's something that the Chinese government doesn't like, they will change it. They will take out a clip. They will insert this. They will take out that. Like, they do things at China's request. And you look at it and you go, well, why are they doing that? It's like, oh, well, they want access to all those people, right? There's so many people who they can have access to, right? All of a sudden, it's like you have an opening weekend in America. That's one thing. You have an opening weekend that's wild over there, and that's a whole other thing. So they continuously do that type of thing for them. Then Vivek brings up the whole Uber thing. All of this just shows that they have turned the tables, and you're going to be more like them, right? And on top of that, how many times have we seen, I think I feel like it was Maxine Waters. I forget what she said, but she said something about, well, we have to be able to compete with China. We have to be able to be more like, more like China. And I've talked about this in videos because I'm like, oh, why would you want to be more like the monsters? I'm not saying the Chinese people, but their government, that system. Like, why would you want to be more like that? They're oppressive to their people. Why would you in the government feel you need to be more like that? I've called that out so many times. You have Justin Trudeau talking about his admiration for China, right? And then, again, I'm going to play another video, Vivek talking about China once again here.
China. How should the American people understand?
Oh, of course I have it that fast. My bad, guys, here.
Truly the threat that China poses to our national security, and as president, how do you begin to address that?
So I'm going to state a basic and obvious fact. We cannot depend on an enemy for our modern way of life. We never depended on the USSR for the shoes on our feet or the phones in our pockets. We just didn't. Today, we depend on communist China for the way we live our lives. That doesn't work over the long run. It's like we're in a codependent relationship. Codependent relationships do not end well. The only question is who ends it first. The sooner we end it, the better for us. And I think just run this through in your head if you doubt me on this. If that were a Russian spy balloon flying over half this country, what would we have done? Shot it down in an instant.
What would we have done in Iowa? Once again, what would we have done in Iowa?
Shot it down.
Amen.
If it was Russian. But they wouldn't let you at the U.S. government level because they wanted to fly over half the country, transmit the information, and then do a nominal shoot down over the Atlantic. If that were Russia, we would have ratcheted up sanctions. We didn't do it for China. You want to know why? Let's be honest. I'm going to speak. This campaign's about truth. You see it on your hat. Speak the hard truth. It's because we're scared. We're scared because we depend on them. And Xi Jinping, he says, you know what? You all are addicted to me. You're addicted to that fentanyl I'm pumping across your southern border in a modern opium war that you don't admit you're in. You're addicted to the digital fentanyl that I'm putting in your kids' hands in the form of modern social media. You're addicted to the financial fentanyl in the form of the national debt that you have no capacity to wean yourself off of. And so, Kim, I think this is actually a positive point. It's not a doom and gloom point, I promise, which is that the real question isn't even about China. The real question is, do we have it in us to actually strengthen up with a spine and stand up for who we are?
Now, with what he's talking about, think about that whole thing he just brought up about the spy balloon. In fact, Rogan was just talking about this. In fact, during Trump's presidency, there was a spy balloon that flew over a big part of the United States of America, right? And the quote was, Trump was not given a chance to act, because everybody knows Trump would have been like, oh, it's China's. Shoot it down right now. I'll do it myself. Like, get it. Not only shoot it down, I want it. I want to see it. I want to understand what they were doing. And he would talk about it, and he'd be very loud about it. See, and I'm linking this to what he just said about how we're scared. I don't think, and when he says we, it's obviously the government he's talking about. I don't think it's that they're scared. I think there's a bit of an allowance of this, going back to what James was talking about, this meeting that happened, right? Think about the names that he mentioned. Klaus Schwab, the then emperor, Henry Kissinger. These people had a lot of influence in America behind the scenes. Rockefeller, right? They had a lot of influence behind the scenes. They could easily make people in the government, maybe not the whole government, but they could easily make people in the government more accepting of things that China would do. You know, that point that he brought up about BlackRock, how BlackRock is going to make America do certain things, but then not make China do certain things. You know, it's very true. When we talk about climate change, we never talk about China. And China actually is building coal plants, but they're not only just building coal plants in China, because people have taken notice and they want them to stop that. So they've taken to building coal plants in Africa. And the Africans love it. The Chinese love it. They're making money from it. The Africans are feeling like they're getting taken care of finally. Finally, someone cares about us. And it slowly gives China more access to Africa. It's very interesting. Very, very interesting what they're talking about here. So I don't know if it's that people are scared as much as they're accepting of what China is, because not only are they able to make the U.S. more like them, there's certain people in the U.S. that want to be more like them. Obviously, it's not the regular person walking down the street who's like, man, I just wish Instagram, I just wish I had a social credit system. Man, I really just wonder what my score would be. That's not who it is, right? It's people in charge. So now we move on to Trump, right? Like after I listened to Vivek, I'm like, what did Trump used to say some things about China. I remember him talking about China being a developing nation or a developing economy. And Trump was like, they're not developing. He's like, what are you talking about? He was calling it out and people were getting mad. Of course, you get xenophobic and all that stuff, right? Let's play some clips of Trump talking about this whole thing.
The most important difference in America.
Of course I have it that fast. My bad. I always do that.
His new approach on trade concerns our relationship with China. In 2001, China was admitted to the World Trade Organization. Our leaders then argued that this decision would compel China to liberalize its economy and strengthen protections to provide things that were unacceptable to us, and for private property, and for the rule of law. 2 decades later, this theory has been tested and proven completely wrong. Not only has China declined to adopt promised reforms, it has embraced an economic model dependent on massive market barriers, heavy state subsidies, currency manipulation, product dumping, forced technology transfers, and the theft of intellectual property, and also trade secrets on a grand scale. As just one example, I recently met the CEO of a terrific American company, Micron Technology, at the White House. Micron produces memory chips used in countless electronics. To advance the Chinese government's 5-year economic plan, a company owned by the Chinese state allegedly stole Micron's designs, valued at up to $8.7 billion. Soon, the Chinese company obtains patents for nearly an identical product, and Micron was banned from selling its own goods in China. But we are seeking justice. The United States lost 60,000 factories after China entered the WTO. This is happening to other countries all over the globe. The World Trade Organization needs drastic change. The second largest economy in the world should not be permitted to declare itself a developing country in order to game the system at others' expense. For years, these abuses were tolerated, ignored, or even encouraged. Globalism exerted a religious pull over past leaders, causing them to ignore their own national interests. But as far as America is concerned, those days are over. To confront these unfair practices, I placed massive tariffs on more than $500 billion worth of Chinese-made goods. Already, as a result of these tariffs, supply chains are relocating back to America and to other nations, and billions of dollars are being paid to our Treasury. The American people are absolutely committed to restoring balance to our relationship with China. Hopefully, we can reach an agreement that will be beneficial for both countries. But as I have made very clear, I will not accept a bad deal for the American people.
Man, you got to look deep to see why they really hated Trump, man. You got to look deep. Like think about all the institutions we were just talking about, all the companies. right? Nike, NBA, WWE, movies, TV, Uber, all of the, and there's so much more. These are just the ones that come off the top of my head because I've seen articles and I've seen LeBron James bowing to them, and I think one NBA player was actually taken out. I think he got life banned or just fired, however you say it when it comes to a athlete, because he was talking about the Uyghurs. And they were like, you can't do that. And he was like, I want to protest. He's like, I want to talk about it. And they're like, no. And now he's gone. What's that? You know what I mean? Interesting. Right? But again, like just that clip alone is like, that's one of those things where it's like, why do they hate Trump so much? Like I made another episode about, how we're going to talk about Trump 20 years from now. And trust me, someone's going to see that clip, whether it's through cassette tape because we blow ourselves back to the 80s, which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Kidding. However they see it, they're going to see that and be like, oh, well, that sounds good. Sounds good. That sounds like a good thing. Seems like he was for the people. Everybody, history books keep saying he was for himself. They're going to see things like that and they're going to be like, oh, right? That's one of the things. Now, the reason going back to what I was saying, him saying that about China, all those institutions, all those companies that I just named, all those fields, industries, what makes you think media is not involved in that as well? And now all of a sudden he goes at China like this, right? While there's certain people in the government who kind of want to become like China, or at least like to bow to their requests. And all of a sudden the president, this new president, this unacceptable rogue president who just showed up, illegitimate if you asked Hillary Clinton at the time, shows up and now he's doing this to them. Makes the media activate, as well as many other things made the media activate. Here's another Trump clip.
President Donald Trump called on the World Trade Organization to redefine its criteria of developing economies, saying that some countries are receiving unfair preferential treatment. On Friday, Trump instructed U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer to take action, ensuring that certain wealthy economies categorized as developing countries do not receive special treatment from the WTO. The move is seen to be aimed at China, which is currently locked in a trade war with the U.S., but Trump also specifically pointed out South Korea. Trump says that 7 out of the 10 wealthiest countries in the world are classified as developing countries. Trump requested Lighthizer to brief him within 60 days, and that if progress isn't seen in 90 days, he would stop treating these countries as developing economies and also would not endorse their membership in the OECD.
Just another thing I just wanted to show really quick. So those were, and just so you know, those clips of Trump talking about this is from 4 years ago. 4, maybe even 5 years ago, because this is when he was president, right? And this is the type of thing he was pushing. He was pushing for this really hard. And for some reason, the mainstream media was like, oh, this guy's xenophobic. This, that. They're calling him all sorts of names because he was doing things like this. And nowadays, they have the nerve. And this isn't even meant to be a Trump video, but after I saw him talking about it. And nowadays, what do they say about Trump? That he's in it for himself. He's always been in it for himself. Narcissist, in it for himself. But you can clearly see that there's something going on with China to the U.S., and that he was trying to stop it. Vivek, he does his run, and now he's talking about stopping it. And now we have Trump this year talking about it, and he wants to stop it once again.
Good job, you did too. By phasing in tariffs and restrictions, we will phase out imports of all essential goods from China, and we will bring those jobs and factories back to South Carolina and our other great states. And I will force the Chinese to sell any holdings in the United States that put our national security at risk. We have to do that. I took in hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in taxes and tariffs from China, brought in businesses and brought them back from China like nobody's ever seen before. It's never been done. No other president has ever done anything like it. No other president has ever taken in 10 cents from China. It was always, oh, they're a developing nation. They say they're a developing nation, so on trade deals and all of this, they just rip us off. Nobody's ever ripped us off. But other countries rip us off also, but nobody's ever ripped us off like China. When I got in 507 billion, with a B, billion, in deficits with China. Think of it. Not even sustainable. But this is why we have $32 trillion in debt. When you think about it, much of it's owed to China, which is interesting. We'll have to work that out. I can see a nice swap there. You know, you've screwed us for about 30 years. Let's negotiate that debt.
Right. Very, very interesting. So when you hear what James is saying and you hear what Vivek's saying, and then you hear how Trump was trying to treat China, was trying to get a good deal, a balanced relationship, kind of all makes sense. Now, the part that triggered my mind is that when it comes to Henry Kissinger, right, he's part of the Bilderberg Group. So was Klaus Schwab at one point, if you didn't know. Klaus Schwab left the Bilderberg Group at, I believe it was 1974 or 75. Then the next year started something called the World Forum Management, which he later named the World Economic Forum. Now, his mentor, as James said, was Henry Kissinger. So Henry Kissinger helped him in creating the World Economic Forum. He was talking to him, he was around him, he was mentoring him, right? So now you tell me that they all had this meeting together. Now, one of the scheduled things that the World Economic Forum wants to see by 2030 is that, and it's very clear, I think the article's been scrubbed, I was trying to find it, but the one thing they said that stood out the most to me, they said there will be no more single superpower. The United States will no longer be a superpower, and there will be multiple superpowers. How can you achieve that? You can't go to the United States just as a superpower. You can't go to them and say, listen, you can't be the only superpower anymore. There has to be a bunch of them. The United States is going to be like, make me. What? Go. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? I got my military over here. How many are you got? How many armies you guys got? It's not even half of what I got. What are you talking about? Right? But if you can, from the inside, shake the foundation slowly, right? Through what they've been talking about with China, getting that access, getting, Vivek actually said it pretty well, getting addicted to what China can provide. And then also undermining themselves in terms of what China actually is, what they've grown to be, what Trump called them out as. You're not a developing nation anymore. You're not a developing economy. What are you talking about? Especially when Trump's saying like most of the debt is to China, most of the national debt. That right there tells you, it's like, what? This is not a developing economy anymore. They're posing as that. And there are certain people behind the scenes that are allowing that. So when Trump calls it out, it's a big problem. Just makes you think, right? They want there to be multiple superpowers. Now, you say, well, if they want there to be multiple, China's not going to allow that, but China would allow that. See, if you have a communist regime, right, and other nations slowly adopt the exact same things, there's not a lot of rocking the boats because everybody has their people just oppressed really well. So then there can be multiple superpowers in regards to trade. I mean, Russia, China, India, Brazil, they're all getting together right now and doing this. Right now, they're all coming together and becoming those multiple superpowers that the World Economic Forum said will form by 2030. The only thing standing in their way fully is the United States as a superpower. I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't think James, Rogan said that's a crazy theory. I don't think it's that crazy, especially when you hear what Vivek is saying and then you hear how Trump was dealing with it. And I think Trump saw this a mile away once he got behind the wheel and actually got behind the desk and actually saw what's going on between U.S. and China. That's just me. And he's talking about going hard on them again. And now you start to realize, oh, that's actually so necessary for the United States to remain this beacon of hope and freedom throughout the world. Because it's the last stand. I've said this 100 times. It's the last stand. There's no other places. This falls becomes more like China? What? There's no other places. There's no other places to go that are going to give you the level of freedom you experience. There's no other places. You can't bring that Declaration of Independence talk. You can't bring that Constitution talk to other places. No, sir. No, sir. They have their versions, but it ain't like America's. The last stand, 100%. So when you see Trump go all hard on China like this, it's like, oh, wow, this actually needs to happen. Because if it doesn't happen, it actually is leading to the U.S.'s downfall. Just something that I thought about after I watched that clip. Just wanted to bring that to you guys. Let me know what you guys think in the comments about this whole thing. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff helps the channel tremendously. Other than that, I'm out.